हेलो गाइस, नमस्ते। कैसे हैं आप? मैं हूं अर्जुन टंडन और आप देख रहे हैं एक और एपिसोड ट्रेडिंग की बात ग्रो के साथ का। हमारे पिछले एपिसोड में हमने बात की थी रौनक से, जहां पे हमने सीखा रिस्क डिफाइंड ऑप्शन स्ट्रेटजीज के बारे में। अगर आपने वो एपिसोड नहीं देखा तो प्लीज जरूर देखें, उस एपिसोड में बहुत कुछ है सीखने को। तो चलिए आइए बात करते हैं आज के सेशन की। हमारे आज के स्पीकर हैं एक बहुत ही अमेजिंग और एक्सपीरियंस सिस्टम ट्रेडर। उनका नाम है प्रथमेश गोडबोले। उन्होंने अपनी इंजीनियरिंग यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ मुंबई से करी और उसके बाद अपनी मास्टर्स फाइनेंशियल इंजीनियरिंग में प्रेस्टिजियस न्यूयॉर्क यूनिवर्सिटी से करी। अपनी पढ़ाई करने के बाद उन्होंने ओरेकल और क्वांट कैपिटल पे काम करा। उन्होंने अपना ट्रेडिंग करियर 2009 में शुरू करा और फुल टाइम ट्रेडिंग में 2016 से आए। तो चलिए आइए बात करते हैं मिस्टर प्रथमेश से। हाय प्रथमेश, वेलकम टू ट्रेडिंग की बात ग्रो के साथ। थैंक यू फॉर जॉइनिंग अस।
Thanks, Arjun, for inviting me here.
I would like to tell the viewers that Prathamesh has been trading systematically for a long time now, and he's a complete knowledge powerhouse when it comes to systematic trading. So, Prathamesh, आपने अपनी जर्नी कैसे शुरू करी? Like, how did you get into trading, and उसके बाद systems और algos में आप कैसे आए?
Sure. So I started reading about markets in 2009, 2008, 9, last financial crisis ke time. And at the time, I remember the market was down 70%. I was still studying at the time. I was in college. I was studying engineering. And before I graduated, it was before the crash. So tabhi, everybody wanted to be an investment banker or a trader because markets were at all-time highs. Everybody was getting hired and record bonuses in banking and finance. And by the time I graduated, it was the opposite because the market had crashed and everything was, people were getting laid off. Lehman Brothers had gone down. And I thought it was very surprising that, the sentiment and everything shifted so drastically in a span of 1 year between Jan and December 2008. And decided I want to, read more about this. So I started reading the newspaper. I read a bit about investing, about Warren Buffett, how a lot of people start their journey. And then I thought I wanted to do this in more detail professionally. So I studied for CFA and then I went for my master's to New York University. I did a master's in financial engineering, after which I worked there for a bit. Then I came back to India. I worked at a broker for a little while. And at the broker, I was doing institutional equities. So it was sell side. I wasn't taking any positions for myself, but it gave me a good insight into how large traders trade, what kind of size do they take, and what kind of considerations they need to have. Like it is very different when you trade in your own account and when you're trading for a fund. And so I thought that was a very kind of learning experience for me in terms of figuring out what I want to do later. And after that, I've been trading since then on my own.
So Prathamesh, like when you were trading at the desk, yeah, when you were at the sell side, did that have an influence as to कि आपको सिस्टम ट्रेडिंग करनी है या डिस्क्रिशनरी ट्रेडिंग करनी है, समथिंग ऑफ
Definitely.
दैट सॉर्ट?
Definitely, because in the last 10 years or so, you have a big change even on the institutional side, where earlier it was dominated by manual trading, where you would have very experienced traders who would, it would called a working order, where they would give, like an institution would come in and to give you an order of like 1 lakh or 2 lakh shares for a relatively not very liquid stock. And it was the trader's skill to get them a really good price. So, at the time, it really mattered to have an experienced trader, and commissions were also much higher because of this. Then, I think in the last 5 or 10 years, you had a lot of new systems coming. Everybody started offering algorithms, and
राइट।
overall, what they found is, on an average, it evens out. You may have a edge when by giving the order to an experienced trader if it's an illiquid stock. But if you're trading the Nifty basket, like the basket of the 50 stocks in the Nifty 50, or you're buying a large tranche of large caps, then the algorithm is going to do better in the long run. And once you have an algorithm, you can scale it, much more than you can scale with a single trader. And so I think now most of the volume is algorithmic all over the world, even in India. And so now it's an arms race between different algorithms where one algorithm will try to, outperform the other.
The other. Right. So, Prathamesh, what kind of trading strategies do you deploy? Are they more of trend following in nature, और आप जो strategies deploy करते हो वो ज़्यादा indices में रहती हैं या stocks में रहती हैं?
So it has evolved over time. When I first started out many years ago, I just traded the cash segment stocks. I would analyze the chart, take a view that over a few weeks or a few months, and then buy and hold on it. Uh, over time, I started doing more intraday because I moved to systematic trading, where you do not have to sit and trade manually, but you can automate it with an API. So at the moment now, I just trade the indices for most part, and it's entirely systematic. There is no discretion involved.
And you are doing mostly trend following, right?
Oh, right, right. So it's mostly trend following. Over the years, I kind of talked to a lot of people, including you, and I got some ideas into how to diversify away from a trend system because trend systems have their own pitfalls, which is that you can have a very long time with a drawdown because there is no trend in the market. And at such times, it helps to have something that works well in sideways or choppy markets. Now, there are two ways you
To
can.
diversify, right?
Right. Now, there are two ways you can diversify, and you can actually diversify with a trend system for a trend system. And the way to do this is by changing the time frame. So, if you have a market that is choppy, say on a daily time frame, it need not be choppy on an intraday time frame. You could still have a trend that lasts for 4 hours or 3 hours in the day, but by the end of the day, it returns to the same price. So if you traded on a daily chart, your trend system may be not making any money, but the intraday system would still be making money.
Correct.
And the other way
So
is, of course,
basically, yeah.
sorry, go
Sorry.
on.
So different time frames have their own trends, and
Correct.
if a larger or a smaller time frame is not trending, that does not mean another time frame is
Exactly.
also not trending. So maybe you can diversify by having your position spread across different time frames.
Exactly. And it could be different instruments as well. So ideally, you would want to trade different instruments that are not correlated. So maybe now Nifty and Bank Nifty are very correlated, but something like a mid cap portfolio or again, I think there's some like if you take equities as a whole, there is going to be correlation that is unavoidable, but relatively they have different betas, so it's not going to be exactly overlapping. Or you could just have something entirely different like commodities or currencies.
True, true. So Pratnesh, when you're doing trend following intraday, your preferred choice of instrument is futures or options?
It depends. On most days, I use options, and on some days, I'll switch the system to use futures because it depends on the implied volatility. Now, there are three ways to execute a view that you have on some market. Like let's say मैं निफ्टी पे बुलिश हूँ, मुझे लग रहा है ये 18,000 से 200 पॉइंट ऊपर जाएगा, तो मैं इधर फ्यूचर्स बाय कर सकता हूँ या फिर मैं कॉल्स बाय कर सकता हूँ या फिर मैं पुट्स सेल कर सकता हूँ.
Correct.
And again, there may be still even more ways to take this position, but broadly, these are the three
Three
straightforward ways
ways.
to do it. Now, in each three, you have a different kind of exposure to volatility and other factors. So, for example, when you buy futures, you are not affected by any change in implied volatility. So वो ऊपर भी गया नीचे भी गया, आपको जितना points का move है उतना ही मिलने वाला है. Now, suppose you buy the calls and this rally, which is coming into the price, is after a big fall. So market को लगा है कि काफी volatility आने वाली थी, but it did not come in. So volatility is now falling. तो आपके calls पे काफी कम profit हो सकता है futures से जो आपने buy किया. And conversely, the puts may give you more P&L than the calls and the futures both because of the
Basically, put
extra.
shorts will outperform your call
Correct,
longs.
correct. So this happens if the volatility fell as the market went up. Now the reverse is also true, where if you are bearish on the market and you buy puts, it may substantially outperform selling futures. So there is some discretionary element involved because you know that some events will happen in advance, like an OPEC meeting or the RBI meeting. So you know that the volatility is going to go up. Now on those days you can just switch to futures. That's what I prefer to do so that
Okay.
you don't have any uncertainty about the volatility.
So you have figured out a way to dynamically switch between these three, depending
Yes.
on what kind of a wall regime we are in.
Correct. So, I mean that's kind of in terms of I don't actually have a system to decide whether the wall is going up or down. That is, I try not to predict it. I only try to avoid the days when I have a very high
Right.
probability that it will go down. Like if I see that it has gone up because of an event and it's about to cool off, that's when I'll switch it from options to futures. So the rest of the strategy stays the same. Only when it comes to the part where it sends the order, it decides whether it should pick the futures or the options.
Okay. So Prathamesh, एक
So
गलती जो
I'll
बहुत
add
से
one
लोग,
more point.
yeah,
Sorry,
sorry.
I'll just add a point to it. So as such, if you're trading a directional view, be buy or sell intraday, then in most cases, like 999 out of 100 times, the options buying the option is better than the futures because your futures takes a lot more margin. It also, essentially, say your exchange goes down someday, like we have had it happen in the past couple of years, where your orders were cancelled or just could not execute a trade. Maybe your
Right.
broker disconnects, whatever, then your futures is an uncapped risk because you won't be able to exit it even if you wanted to or even if you run out of margin. But with your option, you know that your risk is capped. So suppose your bank nifty is at 40,000 today and you bought an at the money call option instead of the futures. So your risk is limited to 200 rupees or whatever premium you have paid. Even if it goes
Right.
to zero, the rest of it is still, your account is still intact. Whereas with the futures, let's say there's a lower circuit in the market when it reopens after a shutdown, and then now you have taken a big hit, and you don't need. It's not like this event cannot happen. It could happen 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but you can't. You don't want to have that risk.
Correct. So basically, when you're buying options, your risk is comparatively much lesser compared to the same when you're trading in futures, especially in a scenario where the exchange goes down or you have a problem at your
Right.
broker's end.
Right.
In
Now,
scenarios
I'll
like
also add a qualification that this works if the option is cash settled, because that's very important. When you buy the index option, it's settled by netting out whatever your profit
correct,
or loss is.
correct,
But if you have a position in the stocks now, on the expiry day, if you're still holding on to it, you will end up taking delivery or giving delivery, and that
true.
could create more complications. So I would not suggest that it's kind of a definite improvement over the futures if you're trading stocks, but for indices, definitely.
राइट प्रथमेश एक गलती जो बहुत से लोग करते हैं व्हेन बाइंग ऑप्शंस इज दैट दे गो ऑल इन. ठीक है, लोग सिर्फ प्रीमियम देखते हैं ना कि कितना उनका नेट एक्सपोजर हो रहा है. जब आप
Right.
ऑप्शंस बाय करते हो तो आप अपनी पोजीशन साइजिंग कैसे करते हो? हाउ डू यू कीप योर एक्सपोजर एंड योर लेवरेज इन चेक?
Okay. So I think this is a very, very big mistake if somebody is assuming that the option premium is the position size, because it is not. The option premium is like an insurance policy, and जो insurance का payout का amount है policy का, that is your actual position size. आप अगर इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी 1 करोड़ का लेके प्रीमियम 10,000 दे रहे हो, तो आपका 1 करोड़ का इंश्योरेंस है, 10,000 का नहीं है. वो सिर्फ प्रीमियम है. And that's the same with your option position when you're buying. So when I buy the at the money call for 200 on a bank nifty of 40,000, my position is as good as half a lot of bank nifty of at 40,000. It's not actually कि 200 रुपए का मैंने position लिया है, because the P&L on that 200 rupees will swing as if I have a futures contract. So, if you just bought a bank, you also have ETFs, right, for Bank Nifty, and I don't know Bank Nifty के लिए है कि नहीं, but Nifty के लिए तो
नाइन्टीज.
Nifty 20 है. तो सपोज आपके पास 200 2,000 रुपए है और आपने 2,000 का निफ्टी 20 लिया और 2,000 रुपए के प्रीमियम का जितना वर्थ ऑप्शंस लिया निफ्टी का. तो दीज आर वेरी वाइडली डिफरेंट पोजिशंस बिकॉज द निफ्टी
राइट.
20 is a actual position worth 2,000 rupees.
राइट.
Whereas in the option आप 2,000 का डिपॉजिट दे रहे हो, वो 2,000 का पोजीशन साइज नहीं है. 2,000 का डिपॉजिट है ऑन अ पोजीशन दैट इज मच लार्जर. इट कुड इवन बी 8 lakhs 10 lakhs in notional size. I think if Nifty is at 18,000 and your lot is what 50, I think 50, right? So
Correct.
your position is effectively 9 lakhs for each lot of futures. Now, if you trade the at the money option, तो आप effectively half futures ले रहे हो हर
Right.
option के लिए,
Correct.
put या call के लिए. So generally, if you want to use options as a substitute for the futures, then the simplest is to just trade the at the money. Your liquidity is also highest for at the money strikes because that's where the market makers and
So
most
Prathamesh,
of the volume happens.
when you trade at the money options in lieu of futures, so क्या आप डबल द क्वांटिटी ऑप्शंस लेते हो जस्ट टू मैच द
जी,
डेल्टाज? क्योंकि
correct,
एट द मनी ऑप्शन का 0.5 डेल्टा रहता है, सो टू मैच इट
correct.
विद अ फ्यूचर तो 1 to 1 मूवमेंट देता है, तो क्या आप डबल क्वांटिटी ऑप्शंस में लेते हो?
Double, exactly. So it mathematically, if you check the formula and all, it may not be exactly the
या
amounts
या
because थोड़ा बहुत तो futures ऊपर होने वाला है नीचे होने वाला है. Sometimes you will make less, sometimes you will lose a little, but that adjusts out over the long run. It doesn't matter.
राइट.
Now, if you choose an option that is substantially in the money, then you are effectively trading the futures. You're not actually using the option. And if you're buying, substantially out of the money, so like essentially you're taking a lot of exposure to other factors than just the price because the way implied volatility affects an out of the money option is very different from at the money, and same for time decay. So I think intraday के लिए ये factors कम matter करते हैं because your holding time itself is quite short. But if you're doing positional, like holding for a few days, then this will give you widely different P&L based on which one you choose. So
ट्रू.
ATM is the simplest generally.
Prathamesh, drawdowns और losses जो हैं, that is a very very normal part of trading.
Right.
So, how much of a drawdown percentage आपके लिए एक acceptable range में रहता है? What kind of drawdown figures do you work with?
So personally, I think 10% is about the max that I'm okay with. And this varies from like system to system. So depending, it's like I know that some systems will invariably have a higher drawdown simply because the nature of the instrument is so. So for example, Bank Nifty tends to have very big trend days, and then it consolidates for a longer time. So I know to expect that although the returns are higher, it will have more number of choppy trades after a big trend. So I'm okay with having a higher drawdown on Bank Nifty system than a Nifty system. But I will size the position so that the Bank Nifty trades are smaller than the Nifty. So my overall drawdown doesn't get worse. And I think, when it comes to drawdown, a regular question is how do you know when to stop running a particular system? मेरा backtest में 10% drawdown तो है, but मैंने live
So
किया.
I was just coming to this question. आपने एडवांस में मेरा क्वेश्चन पकड़ लिया है, but please answer this.
Right. So it's always a question, right? My backtest में 10% था, but after I went live, it's now already at 18%, and like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And I think there is no kind of magic answer to it. And I think the only real answer is you should analyze why did it happen. So there are several reasons why it can be. The simplest is that the way the market moves is simply different. तो उसका कुछ नहीं कर सकते. That's just a part of how markets behave. So, suppose you traded a trend following system in 2017 on a daily chart and you got fantastic returns because the market just went up straight. You could use any indicator. It didn't matter which indicator you used.
Correct.
As long as you were buying, you were going to make money. But 2018 was a very different kind of market. So, that's kind of the stress test where your drawdown starts mattering. So, if you have a case where the market just changed, then there's nothing you can do about it. Just stop running the system. And if you have a case where your drawdown is because the like essentially the market is still giving you profitable trades, but your losses are more or your losses are more frequent, then this can be fixed. So as an example, suppose you traded with very small stop losses in 2019, say the Nifty or Bank Nifty, whichever. And in 2020, you started getting hit on your stop losses very fast. Why? Because the volatility went up substantially. When the market was when the VIX was at 15, Nifty would move maybe 20 points in 1 hour.
Right.
But in March 2020, it would move 20 points in 2 ticks. Now you cannot use the same stop loss when the VIX is at 80 than when the VIX was at
Correct.
20.
Basically, you cannot use absolute stop loss when VIX
Correct.
is at varying levels.
Correct. Right. So now this is not a case of your system being wrong. It's simply that you should tweak your system. Like you cannot have the same assumptions that you had when you were running the system with the VIX at 20.
Yeah.
So one way is you simply use a filter to find, what kind of environment does your strategy do well. So it's like an on-off switch for your strategy. If it switches to off, then just stop running it. Use some other strategy that works well in that time, or just do nothing. There's no condition that you must always be trading. Not trading and sitting on cash is also fine.
So
And
Prathamesh,
I think the second, sorry, go on.
sorry, just a point related to this. When
Sure.
you're figuring out, say, stop losses for a system, and you're wanting to base it on volatility. So
Hmm.
what all tools do you like use to figure that out? Is it some kind of an ATR or some indicator of that sorts that you use to figure out that what is an optimal range for that instrument basis which you can set your stop losses?
So there's no hard and fast rule. Any kind of indicator will give you more or less the same results. I personally use the ATR as a proxy for how wide the range is for the last X candles. But you can use Bollinger Bands. You can simply calculate the standard deviation of the last, 1 day, 5 day, whatever, based on whatever time frame you are trading. So the idea is simply to find when the state has changed. So it could be, the simplest is just look at the VIX. Now, of course, VIX can go up without any, VIX is telling you expected vol. It's not actual realized volatility.
Right.
So हो सकता है कि VIX पहले ही थोड़ा ऊपर गया हो despite no volatility in the markets. But in most cases, the VIX is a good kind of proxy for whether your volatility is, high or low. So again, there are technicalities. Ki VIX gives more weightage to at the money options and closer expiries and all. So I try not to complicate it. I prefer not making it too numerical because at no point am I trying to get an exact view on something. Because I think it doesn't matter. मुझे इतना accuracy चाहिए नहीं, कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ने वाला है उससे. मुझे जनरल आइडिया चाहिए कि मार्केट वॉलेटाइल है या नहीं है. सो अगर वॉलेटाइल हो सकता है, तो आई वांट टू वाइडन माय स्टॉप्स. अगर नहीं है तो यू कैन श्रिंक योर स्टॉप्स.
Right. Absolutely.
In fact, think about it. Suppose you have a bank nifty setup that you use to go long or short, and say you have a stop loss of 100 points normally, and you know that now the volatility is much lower, and you can shrink your stop loss to as small as 50 points or even maybe 40 points. So now your profit on each winning trade is double, twice of what it was before. So your the periods of low volatility can actually make much more money than periods of high volatility.
Basically, you can size up in those periods.
Correct. You can that's the idea. You size up during low volatility and you size down during high volatility.
Right. रत्नेश, बहुत से लोग हैं जो अपनी स्ट्रैटेजीज को बैक टेस्ट तो कर लेते हैं और बैक टेस्टिंग में प्रॉफिट्स भी शो होते हैं, बट
Hmm.
जब वो स्ट्रैटेजीज लाइव होती हैं तो रिजल्ट्स बहुत ही डिफरेंट होते हैं. आई आई बिलीव वन ऑफ द रीजंस कुड बी कर्व फिटिंग और overfitting when you're performing back testing. Now, what is your take on curve fitting? Like, how do you ensure that you kind of avoid falling into this pit of curve fitting, yeah, over fitting? What all measures do you take to avoid all this?
Right. So I think this is a very, very important question. Ki whenever you make a strategy in a back test and it shows very amazing results, it's always a question: is this sustainable or was this just a fluke? Or like have I just over optimized it for some particular time frame? So I think one thing you should always do is never optimize. If you run some kind of optimizer ki like लोग एमी ब्रोकर यूज करते हैं जिसमें यू हैव एन ऑप्टिमाइजर जो आप पैरामीटर 1 से लेके 100 तक डाल दो और वो सब कॉम्बिनेशन टेस्ट करके बता देगा. तो आप पूरे डेटा पे कभी रन मत करना बिकॉज देन यू आर डेफिनेटली कर्व फिटिंग. You should always have डेटा दैट इज स्प्लिट इनटू पार्ट्स. आप एक डेटा पे ट्रेन करो उसको और फिर दूसरे डेटा में उसको टेस्ट करो. सो
आई थिंक
सपोज
व्हाट
यू
यू रेफरिंग इज टू इज इन सैंपल एंड आउट सैंपल डेटा.
करेक्ट करेक्ट.
कुछ
सो
कुछ डेटा अलग से रख लो जिस पे आप अपनी बैक टेस्टिंग करो, एंड अदर सेट ऑफ डेटा जिस पे आप स्पेसिफिकली टेस्ट करके देखो कि क्या वो स्ट्रैटेजी
करेक्ट
परफॉर्म कर रही है या नहीं.
राइट. मतलब अभी आपने अगर 2010 से 20 तक 10 साल का डेटा ले लिया, उसमें बैक्टेरिया ऑप्टिमाइजर रन कर लिया, तो उसमें परफॉर्मेंस जो बेस्ट चल रहा है, दैट वो तो इट इज ऑलरेडी कर्व फिटेड बिकॉज it has already chosen all the best trades that could have possibly happened for that set of parameters. But say you backtest only from 2010 to 2015, and then you use those parameters to see whether 2015 to 2020 it still did well. Now, that I think has more confidence than just blindly optimizing over your entire data. The second is I think very important, which is stability. So suppose we'll take some random indicator that like a moving average. Suppose you have a strategy that says 50 periods ka moving average use kar lo, and whenever the price goes above you buy, whenever the price goes below you sell. Now if your strategy is stable, मतलब आपके कर्व फिटेड नहीं है, तो 50 का 47 या 46 करके ज्यादा फर्क नहीं पड़ना चाहिए, और 50 का 55 करके भी ज्यादा फर्क नहीं पड़ना चाहिए. देयर मे बी वन और टू ट्रेड्स दैट यू विल टेक एक्स्ट्रा और यू विल लूज, दैट्स फाइन, बट ओवरऑल योर पीएनएल शुडंट चेंज मच. बट इफ इट अगर वो चेंज हो रहा है ड्रास्टिकली, by changing some small values of parameters here and there, then you have definitely profited. It is not, then you're just flying blind. Agar फिर भी profit हुआ, it's just luck. It's not, there may not really be any edge in that strategy.
Absolutely. And a very good example is जो आजकल जैसे for example lot of people are doing say a 920 straddle,
Right,
और उसके variations are like they will come up with 921 पे ज़्यादा profit है या
right,
919 पे
right,
ज़्यादा
right.
profit है. I think that falls under the purview of curve fitting, क्योंकि आप एक
Absolutely.
ऐसा पॉइंट ढूंढ रहे हो उस डेटा के अंदर जहां पे मोस्ट ऑप्टिमाइज्ड है और प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी हाईएस्ट है. नाउ इन द
Absolutely.
फ्यूचर दैट पॉइंट में चेंज बिकॉज न्यू डेटा इज कमिंग इन,
Correct.
और आगे का डेटा बहुत अलग हो सकता है, एंड शायद 921 की जगह 925 चलने लग जाए.
Correct.
So, optimizing a strategy, as you said, on the past data and solely using that in the live market is not an advisable thing. It is good to have an in sample and out sample data जिस पे आप एक पार्ट पे अपनी strategy को optimize करो और दूसरे पे उसको validate करो.
Correct. Now, note that the example I gave where you backtest from say 10 to 15 and then test it on 2015 to 2020, it is actually like अगर आप intraday trade कर रहे हो तो markets काफी change हुए हैं over 10 years. Like just the raw price of the Nifty has doubled from 8,000 to 18,000, and the nature of participants in the market has changed. So, I mean, you should keep in mind that काफी changes भी होते हैं market में. So it is
रमेश,
not
एक मिनट में आपको इंटरप्ट कर रहा हूँ.
sure.
पहले तो आप ये बताओ आप मेरे एडवांस में क्वेश्चंस कैसे पढ़ रहे हो. This was the exact
Oh,
question that I was coming up with,
okay,
and you very well picked it up.
okay.
So please go on. I was going to ask that markets have evolved, especially over the past
Drastically,
2 years. There have been a lot of changes that have come in,
correct.
and especially during this COVID era. So how have your systems performed during this time? क्या आपको कुछ जरूरत पड़ी है changes करने की, या आपके जो systems हैं वो as per expectations ही चले हैं? ऑल्सो एक चीज और पूछना चाहूंगा कि ड्यूरिंग दिस पीरियड जहाँ पे चेंजेस आए हैं और बहुत सी नई चीजें हुई हैं, क्या आपने कुछ ऐसा नोट करा है कि कुछ पैटर्न्स हैं जो कि और प्रोमिनेंट हो गए हैं और ये पिछले सालों में नहीं होते थे, से 2017 18 19 में, और 2020 और से अब 21 तक 22 तक ये थोड़े और प्रोमिनेंट होने लग गए हैं? कुछ ऐसी चीजें आपने ऑब्जर्व करी हैं?
I think I'll answer the second one first. It's the new patterns in the markets. So I think the trends have got a lot more accentuated during the day as compared to pre 2018. I think something definitely changed in the markets in 2018. Like you can run a lot of different systems that trade intraday trends. Use any indicator, and you will find that 2018-19 performance is very different from 2016-17 or any year before it. Partly, I think this is because of discount broking, because it really took off in the last few years. And in COVID, I think the user base for most brokers has doubled, quadrupled, or gone up 10 times or more. So these are all new traders, and that trading patterns are very different from the way institutions trade. So institutions will have very strict rules that, if they say that buy this with a limit of 100, then they simply do not buy if it goes above 100. And a retail trader is driven by emotions. So, you have a lot of people chasing stocks, and now you have social media and influencers who will say that, okay, this stock is great. And it's not necessary, like, I'm not attributing that they have some malified intention to pump the stock, but it's simply that the audience is so large that even if, say, 10% of those people decide that, this is a great idea, let me go and buy it. So that's going to create intraday patterns that are actually tradable by other traders.
True.
And I think that's the first part of the question. I think, when I'll combine several questions. So one question is, how do you know when to stop running your system, for example, or what happens if you're curve fitted? So I think you can't fix all of these, but there's a simpler solution. You don't need to predict any of this. What you do is you allocate some amount X to a system. You should never have a single system. You would ideally want to have two or three systems that are not correlated to each other. And whichever system is doing well, you allocate more to it. Whichever is doing worse, you keep cutting its allocation. So you are never completely out of a system. You are never completely, putting all your eggs in one basket in one system. So you're always, so if a system starts doing poorly, you start cutting, its allocation. So say your backtest drawdown was 10%. Now as you approach 10%, you want to already cut your allocation, say from,
Right.
100% to 80 or 70%. Now if it
Right.
crosses 10%, you cut it down to 50% allocation. It continues. See, now it's because you're cutting the allocation in terms of dollar amounts, or so it's kind of losing less and less even if it has stopped working. So you don't really care if it has stopped working. It matters much less monetarily.
Right. Right.
And then you increase the allocation as it starts performing again.
तो बेसिकली जब वो ड्रॉडाउन से वापस बाहर आना शुरू हो एंड यू ऑब्जर्व दैट व्हेन इट इज गोइंग बैक अप, तो तब अपनी एलोकेशन दोबारा उसमें बढ़ाने लग जाओ.
Correct. Correct. So you never go all in, all out. No on off switch. Just gradually increase and decrease the allocation.
राइट. सो प्रथमेश,
Because
वन
I
ऑफ द
don't claim to
क्वेश्चंस.
know कि चलेगा कि नहीं. मैं सिर्फ कट करते
एग्जैक्टली.
जाऊंगा, नहीं चल रहा है.
तो बेसिकली आप अपना रिस्क कम करते जाओगे जैसे जैसे उसकी परफॉर्मेंस
Correct.
डिग्रेड हो रही है. वंस
Right.
इट्स बैक टू नॉर्मल यू अगेन गो बैक इन.
Correct.
सो प्रथमेश, कमिंग बैक टू वन ऑफ द क्वेश्चंस आई आस्क्ड कि ये जो 2 साल गए हैं पिछले, इनमें ऑब्वियसली आपने भी नोट करा है दैट मार्केट्स में कुछ स्ट्रक्चरल चेंजेस आए हैं. सो क्या आपके जो सिस्टम्स की परफॉर्मेंस रही है वो एज पर एक्सपेक्टेशन रही है, या आपको कुछ जरूरत पड़ी है कुछ एरियाज में ट्वीकिंग करने की?
I definitely needed tweaking. So, for instance, I think 2020 was a surprise in terms of how much volatility we had. I absolutely did not expect VIX at 80, or markets to be jumping, Nifty to be jumping 10 points in a single tick intraday. So, for some days, I simply stopped running the systems. I just didn't trade because I was fine with it. I said, you'll get more opportunities in a month from now. I don't need to trade every second of the market. And once the whole thing cooled down, say by June or July, I used that data to then, backtest and analyze to see what would have worked and what couldn't have. So that's partly what gave me the idea of sizing the stops based on the volatility, where you want to increase your risk and scale down your size because the volatility has gone up. So again, there's an assumption here that the trends still happen. It's just that they are more volatile. If
राइट.
you just have volatility with no trends, then just don't run your strategies.
ट्रू.
Just stop it.
आई थिंक समथिंग आई हैव आल्सो नोटिस दैट जो पुलबैक्स आते हैं अब, that have also become lot deeper compared to the
Hmm.
past. And
Okay.
जो pullbacks हैं, they have a tendency to take out your stops and go back up. So often, when you're trailing, so trailing में ये there is this issue that you are thrown out of the trends very
This would
quickly.
be especially true for options rather than
Yeah,
futures.
yeah, exactly. That is there. प्रथमेश, पिछले 2 सालों में मार्केट्स में वॉलेटिलिटी का एक बहुत फंडामेंटल या मेजर रीजन रहा है जो फेड और वर्ल्ड वाइड सेंट्रल बैंक्स के एक्शंस हैं.
Right.
Starting in 2020 when rate cuts were done and quantitative easing was performed, to now when rates are being aggressively hiked.
Hmm.
So, I know you have been studying central bank actions for a long time now, and you were also one of the few people जिन्होंने उस टाइम पे एक बहुत insightful opinion दिया था on your blog. So, historically, Fed के actions ने markets को कैसे affect किया है? या using this information, is there a way to figure out, how to time the market or when do you invest in the markets? Is there something like that?
I think there definitely is, and I think the roots actually go very far back in history. But so till the 1970s, all the exchange rates were fixed, and you could take you could take dollars to the U.S. central bank, like not literally, but in theory, the dollar was convertible to gold, and so everything was pegged. There was no currency market as such to trade. Then from 1970s onwards, we had a floating exchange rate regime. All the currencies now move against each other all the time. The currency market is open 24 hours, and this spills over into every sector of the economy. So if let's say your Indian government bond pays 6% interest, and your US government bond pays maybe 2% interest. So an investor, say in Japan, has a choice of where to put his money. He's going to decide, I can get 6% in India or 2% in the US, but he also knows that the rupee is also going to depreciate a few percent. So he will look at the net kind of return, and then wherever he thinks it's more, he's going to put his money there. And the size of these flows itself is very massive now. So that itself creates more trends in currencies and interest rates. So I think, and what drives all of this is central banks. Because central banks, like the US Fed now, has a mandate to say that they need to get inflation down. So they know that it will have spillover effects on the economy, but for them it's a priority. So since January this year, for example, they have been hiking rates nonstop, and the market has been going down straight one way. Now you can go back in history and look at what happens when the Fed starts hiking, and almost every hiking cycle has not really been good for equities, especially on sectors like the tech sector where zero rates is really great for them. So I think in fact, you can just ignore the charts entirely and just go by what central banks are doing, and you will still be fine. You need not even analyze the markets at all if you just follow the central banks. I'll give you an example. In 2008, they cut the rates to zero, and these rates were at zero for the next 7, 8 years. I think 2016, 17 is when they first started hiking. And it was a very slow hike. They hiked like 25 basis points once in a few months. That's nothing compared to the pace they are doing it now. And they announced in advance, almost 6 months in advance in 2017, that Jan 2018, they are going to start selling the holdings of bonds that they have purchased over the last 10 years. And this was effectively another rate hike. And like, so now in advance when this is happening. You know that January 2018 is when it's happening. And you can look at the markets from that point, and it has, all the kind of high beta sectors, mid caps, small caps, and tech, everything just sold off for the entire year. And when did that bear market end? In December 2018, when the Fed again came and announced that they are reversing course, they are going to go slow on the hikes. Everybody just relaxed, and then the market bounced back in 2019. Now, the next such incident is the COVID drop itself. The markets bottomed on the exact day that the US Fed said that they're going to intervene in the markets and bring stability. It was 23rd March 2020. That day marked the bottom. And it's not like there is some conspiracy here. It's also very logical as to why central bank actions affect the economy and the markets. So suppose I have 100 rupees, and you have an option to put these in a fixed deposit at 10%. So if I give you this 100 rupees today and you put it in an FD, in 5 years it's worth 150 rupees, right? Like, let's say interest rates are 10%.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Then so you get something naturally. So if interest rates go to zero and you go and you put this in an FD, then it's still worth 100 rupees, right? Even after 5 years, it's nothing more.
Correct.
So what this tells you is that the present value today of future cash depends on the interest rates, right?
Right.
So
Right.
जितना interest rates कम है उतना आज का वैल्यू ज्यादा है उसका, बिकॉज फ्यूचर में कम मिलने वाला है.
Mm-hmm.
वेराज अगर इंटरेस्ट रेट्स हाई है तो प्रेजेंट वैल्यू कम है बिकॉज फ्यूचर में ज्यादा मिलने वाला है, राइट?
So you mean to say कि Prathamesh, whenever central banks are infusing money या cutting rates, that is the
राइट.
time when markets are really likely to, go up and rally,
करेक्ट.
and vice
करेक्ट.
versa for when they're hiking rates.
करेक्ट. सी इट्स
So it
लॉजिकल,
is it
राइट?
is
इफ द मार्केट.
all driven by central bank actions, especially the Fed.
करेक्ट. Especially the Fed. See, it's very logical. If you say that the interest rate went from 10% to 5%, then it means that it got easier for businesses to borrow money. And, essentially the value of 100 rupees 10 years from now is now, the interest on it is going to be lower, which means the present value on it is much higher now. So what was worth 100 rupees yesterday is now worth maybe 120 rupees. And I think we discussed at the start on how institutions have trade very massive size and they cannot even deploy their capital in one go. So let's say you are an institution and the Federal Reserve cut the rates. So now the market's intrinsic valuation has gone up because of the lower rates. Now, so you know that you need to buy more, but you simply cannot buy all of that capital, deploy it in one day. So you're going to buy 10% today, 10% tomorrow, spread it out over 3 weeks or so. Now that buying itself is going to take the market higher.
Yeah,
So so overall,
absolutely.
so overall, like you have a logical framework for why central banks affect markets and how they affect markets. So
So
I
like
think
similar to 2020, now the उस टाइम पे रेट कट्स करे थे और अब
right,
वही रेट हाइक्स हो रहे हैं. So I think जब से rate hikes have been announced and have been started, markets have not been able to go up. I think
correct,
it is exactly what you're saying कि
yeah,
जब भी rate cuts होंगे उस टाइम पे markets will go up and similar for hikes they will go down. So it is a very
correct,
logical thing to base your trade on or at least your investments on,
right.
that the chances of markets moving in one direction is very much linked with what central banks do now.
Correct. So you cannot predict कि निफ्टी 18,000 होगा या 20,000 होगा,
Yeah.
but you can tell कि it will probably not go up in the next 1 year as long as they are still hiking. So if you
Right.
have an SIP or you have a lump sum, then you can shift it to something else or just put it in an FD. And once the market corrects, then when RBI says कि अभी rate hikes हो गए, maybe we'll stop now or we'll start cutting. Then that's a good time to switch back.
Right. So Pratnesh, in this current period जहाँ पे इतनी अनसर्टेनिटी है और डेली कुछ ना कुछ न्यूज़ फ्लो रहता है, हाउ डू यू मैनेज योर रिस्क और what all things would you recommend to take special care of?
I think you absolutely do not want to go home with an unbounded risk, which means even if you have a like, so first thing, I think it's leverage. So if you are not excessively leveraged, then 99% of the problem goes away right then and there. Like if you're trading with 1x, 2x, that kind of leverage on an index, it's fine. Even a kind of black swan event is not going to be fatal. You might take a loss, but that's fine. You'll recover it eventually. But if you're trading on very high leverage, which is easy with when you're buying options, then that's where you need to really know what your risk is, because on the short side it's very tempting to sell options consistently, and especially out of the money options, and it feels almost like it's an ATM machine where every month it just decays to zero and you get money, and then that one day in 3 years just wipes out your 3 years of P&L in that one day. So you don't want that happening, because consistency is better than having a 3 years of profit and one day that you give it all back. So I think you really want to make sure that you're not over leveraged. Keep your leverage low, and this is just simply because you cannot predict it. Like OPEC, for example, the oil producing countries organization, they announced a cut of 2 million barrels a day, and it came out of the blue. It came on a weekend. You cannot predict this. You cannot do anything about it. So similarly, you can have central banks that will come out and maybe suddenly announce a gradual or massive change in interest rates or exchange rates. What can you do about it? Nothing.
Yeah.
So you don't want to go home with a risk where you can open and have be down 30% or 50% because the central bank decided something. You just don't want that risk.
Basically, either do risk-defined strategies or keep your
Correct.
leverage in check.
Yeah, ideally both. And it's not that hard. You can buy deep out of the money hedges. It will cost you something, but I think it is very much worth the price you pay for that insurance.
Better safe than sorry.
Correct. Better safe than sorry.
So in this, on a completely different topic,
Yeah.
in this era of social media, has it kind of helped you as a trader? Like, has Twitter been of any help to you?
I think quite a lot because a lot of times I find somebody who is working on something or has a similar thought process on maybe some way to optimize a trend following strategy or some market observation on how prices move, and somebody to sound out your idea with. And it's not like people are there are a lot of people who are happily who they share their observations or their views, and I think it's a great way to learn new things. I don't think I have ever had an issue with Twitter. I think
A lot
it's
of,
sorry, go on.
I'm saying a lot of stuff to learn if
Yeah.
used judiciously.
Correct, correct. I think there's a lot of people who post their PNL as well, like a large amount, a large number, and people do get very impressed by it, and maybe some of them take it the wrong way, as in they trade too large and because they want to compete with them. But I think just think of it as motivation. Don't try to compete with it. You'll get there eventually.
Very true. Prathamesh, as I said in the beginning, you are an absolute knowledge powerhouse when it comes to systematic trading. It has been one amazing session and was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you
Sure.
so very much for your time.
Thank you, Arjun. It was nice talking to you too.
तो दोस्तों उम्मीद करता हूँ आज का ये सेशन आपको पसंद आया होगा। प्रथमेश ने कुछ बहुत ही अच्छे पॉइंट्स शेयर करे सिस्टम ट्रेडिंग के ऊपर, जैसे कि कर्व फिटिंग, पोजीशन साइजिंग और रिस्क मैनेजमेंट। उम्मीद करता हूँ कि आप इन पॉइंट्स को अपनी ट्रेडिंग पे अप्लाई करके उसे और बेहतर बना पाएंगे। अगले हफ्ते हम फिर लौटेंगे ऐसे ही एक और एक्सपीरियंस ट्रेडर के साथ। अगर आप चाहते हैं कि हम किसी पर्टिकुलर ट्रेडर को बुलाएं तो प्लीज हमें कमेंट्स में जरूर बताएं। अगर ये वीडियो आपको पसंद आया तो प्लीज लाइक, शेयर और सब्सक्राइब जरूर करें, और याद रखें ये मार्केट सबका है बॉस।
Investment in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing. Please read the risk disclosure documents carefully before investing in equity shares, derivatives, mutual fund, and or other instruments traded on the stock exchanges.